When a school district in California promised a new era of leadership, the community was ready for change. But behind closed doors, change came in the form of chaos. Deadlines became punishments, meetings turned into interrogations, and culture shift became a coded phrase for control. This is the story of a superintendent who ran the school district like a fortress and how HR was left cleaning up the fallout. The board called it a bold move. It was the kind of decision they claimed would redefine education. One member even boasted that it would be praised in the press and talked about in checkout lines at the grocery store. Admittedly, the past few months had been turbulent: leadership turnover, low morale, a string of public missteps. Everyone was eager for a reset. After a national search and several exhausting school board meetings, the board named Dr. Allison Hayes the new superintendent of schools. The press releases hit inboxes at 10:30 that sunny Tuesday morning. With it were photos of her flanked by board members, all stage smiles and clasped hands, standing in front of a carefully curated bookshelf, stacked with titles like Disrupting Education, Leading Through Crisis, and The Courage to be Disliked. The image was meant to say visionary, but to anyone paying closer attention, it screamed PR stunt. What didn't make the press release? Well, Dr. Hayes didn't quite meet the posted qualifications for the role. The policy had once been clear. Superintendent candidates must have prior experience leading a large school district. But just a few months before her appointment, the language was quietly revisited. Must became preferred. One word, easy to overlook in a sea of bylaws, easier still to deny if questioned, but the public barely blinked. By then, they had grown used to the board bending the rules, shifting qualifications, task assigning their friends, tweaking policies, for flexibility. But this time, this small change would not just open a door, it would swing it open wide enough for a storm to walk through. Introducing Dr. Alice Hayes. Dr. Hayes has spent most of her career in mid-sized suburban districts, slowly climbing the ladder from phys ed teacher to assistant superintendent. Her last post was in a district just outside of New York, where she served as the deputy superintendent for strategy and accountability, a role she was given after spearheading a controversial school consolidation plan that cut costs but drew heavy criticism from staff and parents alike. Her supporters called her a data driven reformer. Meanwhile, her critics called her detached, dismissive, and dangerously ambitious. She resigned from that role mid contract, citing family relocation, despite rumblings and a few local blogs hinting at internal investigations and rising staff turnover. But nothing stuck. Despite the whispers, the board in California moved forward. Although two members pushed back, citing concerns over transparency and long term stability, the board's majority held firm. She's a visionary, they shouted. She'll clean house. She'll change the culture. And change it. Change it did. Her first district-wide address was a spectacle. It was held in the Performing Arts Center of the largest high school within the district, spotlights warming the stage, palm trees and other plants dotted about. Dr. Hayes took the podium in her signature blue power suit, her posture rigid, her expression unreadable. She didn't use a teleprompter. She didn't smile much. Her voice was smoothed, modulated, almost practiced, like she had done this before. She opened her first district-wide address with a loaded statement. What worked yesterday won't work tomorrow. I was brought here to make change, and tomorrow will look completely different. There was no mention of listening nor a nod to work already being done, just the clear message that the old way was over. The audience applauded politely. Some people looked around nervously before clapping, as if unsure whether they were witnessing a rally or a warning. Within the month, the transformation began. Her emails were short, no greetings, no thank yous, just bullet points, deadlines, and directives. And if you messed up, You didn't get a conversation. You got invited downtown for an impact coaching session, a sterile label slapped onto what was essentially a formal reprimand, with a smile, of course. It wasn't about growth, it was about control, a reminder that mistakes weren't tolerated, just documented. Anyone not on board was labeled a culture blocker. At the peak of her paranoia, Dr. Hayes introduced a new district policy, a civility and communication order that gave her the final word on tone. Emails, meeting comments, even hallway conversations were expected to reflect what she called professional optimism. Anything less, frustration, disagreement, even natural concern, was flagged as negative energy. She didn't set the standard, she became the judge of it. In practice, it was a gag order dressed as etiquette. Staff were reprimanded for using words like frustrated, concerned, or confused. One principal was cited for being overly pointed in a memo where she asked, "Why weren't we consulted?" And when staff began to quietly push back, asking questions and raising concerns, Dr. Hayes responded with a district wide order. All central office employees would be required to reapply for their own jobs. The reason? To ensure alignment. But everyone understood what that really meant. Speak up, and you may not get invited back. As for Dr. Hayes herself, well, she never walked alone. Whether it was a cabinet meeting, a school visit, a staff training, she was almost always accompanied by a uniformed, armed police officer. Not discreet, not in the background, right beside her in plain sight. Staff whispered about it. Some even joked that they missed the memo about martial law. It stopped feeling like leadership and looked more like a lockdown. At first, people thought it was just a temporary precaution, but it never went away. She arrived at schools, flanked by police, held cabinet meetings with an officer stationed nearby, even walked the halls of the district office with the silent, stone-faced escort trailing behind. When the board inquired about supposed threats towards her, there were no assessments because there were no incident reports, no threatening phone calls, just whispers from her. "There are people who don't want me here," she told the board, "and they'll do anything to stop me. Anything." She had her public persona down to a science. When the cameras were on or a board member was nearby, Dr. Hayes became the picture of polished leadership, measured voice, practiced smiles, just the right amount of scripted warmth. She knew how to sound collaborative without actually inviting input. Teams calls, well, of course she was always on camera, seated at the same pristine desk with a bookshelf staged behind her, titles rotated seasonally, her diploma always visible. Her tone was calm, her answers rehearsed, her background noise non-existent. She'd RSVP'd at district events and community meetings, poised for photos, making carefully chosen remarks, and then disappearing the moment news crews left. You could actually set your watch to it. If the cameras left at 6:15, she was on her way to her car at 6:17. School visits were no different. They were the stuff of myth. Sites were notified days in advance. Teachers were pulled mid-lesson to prep classrooms. Custodial teams were ordered to detail hallways that she'd walk through. Staff were told to be visible, but not vocal. One school's principal later admitted they were instructed to stage student engagement, placing hand-picked students at specific locations, doing activities that aligned with the district's branding. If a teacher asked to speak with her directly, they were ordered to contact the chief of staff. She didn't visit schools, she toured them like a VIP through a museum curated in her honor. And the few people who had real access to her, well, they weren't career educators, they weren't district veterans, they were loyalists, imported from her past. Her version of a cabinet, less about strategy and more about control. She brought her people with her, 3 directors from her previous district, each one given oversight of departments already in place. They didn't observe, they replaced. One longtime payroll supervisor was demoted within a week of asking why procedures were suddenly being rerouted. Another manager, over 20 years with the district, was invited to early retirement after questioning a budget item that had doubled a consulting fee. A chief of staff was installed, one with no K through 12 background, but extensive experience in crisis PR and reputational rehab. She acted as a filter between Dr. Hayes and everyone else. All emails went through her, all meetings required approval. Even cabinet members and staff had to request access. Deadlines became weapons. Policy memos dropped Friday nights with Monday compliance requirements. Board materials were pulled from SharePoint without notice, replaced with revised versions hours before public meetings. People were reprimanded for tone in emails, for using excess punctuation, for not addressing Dr. Hayes by her full title in communication. A principal was reassigned mid-year with no explanation. Teachers found out through a one-line bulletin. Leadership change effective immediately. No one felt safe. Wellness resources were replaced by a consultant who charged $4,000 per session to tell staff that burnout was a mindset. The HR inbox was quiet, not because things were fine, but because people have given up. Then, a letter sent to the board changed everything. It arrived late, after the offices had gone quiet, long after most of the staff had packed up and headed home. The sun had set, and the offices were dark. A single manila envelope slid under the board chair's office door. On the front, written in firm black marker, impossible to miss. To the board chair, with a copy to general counsel. Inside, a 10-page document, carefully constructed, every word deliberate, and at the bottom, not just one signature, but 38. Principals, teachers, district employees, even a few community members, each one listed by name, each one willing to go on record. It was coordinated, and it was impossible to ignore. It detailed patterns of retaliation, calculated, targeted, and unmistakable. An associate administrator who raised concerns about staffing ratios was demoted and reassigned to a satellite campus nearly an hour away after challenging one of Dr. Hayes' directives during a cabinet meeting. Another account described a particularly tense meeting about school boundary changes, a volatile topic already stirring frustration amongst families and staff. During the discussion, a department head known for her steady leadership and years of service voiced concern about the lack of community input and the rush timeline. Dr. Hayes didn't just disagree, she exploded. For nearly 10 minutes, she raised her voice in front of the full leadership team, shouting about loyalty, deadlines, and dead weight. The room went silent. No one dared interrupt. When the department head's eyes welled up, she tried to excuse herself. Dr. Hayes followed her into the hallway, crouched down beside her, and with a half smile whispered, "There isn't a communication issue here. Clearly there's a maturity issue." Then she stood up and walked away, leaving the woman trembling and humiliated while the rest of the team sat frozen just feet away. This wasn't leadership. It was not change management. It was retribution, calculated, personal, and cloaked in the language of reform. It exposed what everyone had quietly feared, an us versus them culture fostered at the highest level, a regime of fear, polished in public, ruthless in private. There were screenshots of emails with contradicting instructions sent hours apart, transcripts from recorded meetings where Dr. Hayes dismissed concerns as emotional distractions. Internal HR records showed finalizing performance evaluations which were reopened and rewritten to justify disciplinary action. One line, centered, bold, left a chill. We are not difficult. We are desperate. The next board meeting was standing room only. The line to enter wrapped around the building. Staff, parents, community members, all shoulder to shoulder. Dozens wore black in silent protest. Others carried signs. Respect isn't retaliation. Culture shift or culture war. During public comment, one side administrator, normally reserved, stepped forward, voice steady but shaking. "We teach our students to stand up to bullies. What happens when the bully is at the top?" Silence, then murmurs, then applause. One board member, clearly agitated, cleared his throat, looked around the dais, and finally spoke. "I have heard enough. I move that we terminate Dr. Hayes effective immediately." He paused, looked at the crowd, and in dismay, he looked back at his colleagues. There were articles, warnings from her past district, patterns that we ignored. We thought we could manage her, but clearly we were wrong. Another pause. No one interrupted, and the motion didn't carry. Instead, the board chair adjourned into closed section for nearly 3 hours. When they returned, their expressions were unreadable. The board president adjusted her mic and read from a prepared statement, the general counsel sitting close by. The board has reached a resolution to part ways with Dr. Hayes. Effective immediately, she will transition out of her role. No mention of a public vote, no public apology or acknowledgement of the harm. What the public wasn't told, but HR later confirmed, was that her departure came with a golden parachute, a severance package equal to 12 months' salary, full health coverage, and a non-disparagement clause that legally silenced any future questions. How much? She walked away with nearly $300,000. Everyone else was left to pick up the pieces. The aftermath was not marked by celebration. There were no victory speeches, no grand gestures, just silence. Quiet, hollow, exhausted. HR and the board began the long, painful process of rebuilding trust, brick by brick, meeting by meeting. They launched listening sessions, not just to check a box, but to actually listen, to hear what people hadn't said, to validate what had been denied. And while some staff opened up, others sat with arms crossed and eyes weary. Because even though the architect of their fear was gone, the architecture remained. Survivor's guilt hung in the air, especially for those who hadn't spoken up. Some wondered if they'd been complicit by staying silent. Others just tried to make it to 5 p.m. without crying in the bathroom. The district's communication policy was rewritten, not in cold legal jargon, but in plain language that centered safety, dignity, and dialogue. Phrases like professional optimism and tone correction were stripped out. In their place, a commitment to transparency, feedback without punishment, and leadership that models, not mandates respect. One principal, after their first all-staff meeting post-Hayes, looked around the room and quietly said, "It feels like I've woken up after a nightmare." The board appointed an interim superintendent. He wasn't flashy. He didn't have a branded hashtag or PR firm. But he'd spent 27 years in education, 20 of them within this district. He knew people's names. He asked how their families were. He showed up to school events and actually stayed after the cameras left. He didn't lead with fear. He led with presence, with kindness and humility. And people noticed. There were still scars, some too deep for quick healing. But there was also something else that hadn't been here before. Hope, albeit small, cautious, and real. Because if fear had once rewritten the culture, then this time maybe care could rewrite it back. Well, there's the bell. This has been the 5 to 9 podcast. Today's episode, the culture shift. Because when fear runs the front office, even an A plus can cause you to fail the class. Remember, not all villains wear masks. Some wear perfectly coordinated outfits with pretty shoes and sparkling jewelry. They stand behind podiums and talk about elevating excellence and change. But when change becomes coercion, when transparency is replaced by fear, that's control. But hey, we're doing it for the children.